Hi there. Today we're looking at doing this wintry snowy scene. There is some instructions you can download off the site which will go through step by step and follow through what we're going to do with this one. Okay, we're going to use a bit of masking, a bit of salt and some lovely colours into the background. So let's get going. Right, let's get going. We're going to do this snowy scene now, and first of all we've got to just put a few lines on here to actually give you some guidelines onto it. So you want to just bring this quite low where the distant horizon is. So normally we'd say about a third up, but we want this a little bit lower than that. So just bring it down so it's only about a quarter of the way up. Otherwise you end up with a lot of foreground with nothing much to do in there. So then we bring the snowy bank up across the side here. And then we'll bring the snowy bank with the tree coming out of it will be up this side, so about halfway up your paper. So it's just a couple of simple little lines. We'll put the tree so it seats into the bank. So we'll seat the tree in, get it to lean forward into the picture. And then we'll bring a little trunk out, and then every time you bring a branch off, that trunk gets a little bit thinner. So if you start to think about your trees, perhaps not quite that much thinner, as they come off, some will come off from the middle of the tree and some will come off from around the back of the tree, so they'll come off at different angles, and we'll just bring another branch up here just to fill in that little gap towards the back there. You only need to draw your main branches in at this stage. You don't need to do all the little twiddly ones. You'll just get an idea of where things are going. And okay, that's probably different to my original one, but it's enough there to start it off. We want to put a fence on here as well, and the fence you need to get a bit of perspective in. This will help to guide your eye into the picture here. So when you're drawing a fence, or just general rule of thumb with any perspective, let me just draw a bit of a perspective on here for a fence line. Your fence is going to disappear away from you, so it's going to get very small towards the end. As it comes closer to you, it gets bigger. So where your eye level is somewhere around the top of the fence here. So when it comes above your fence, the fence will go above your shoulder, so it will get higher. As it comes downwards, it comes lower. So that's your general perspective in there, higher above this end of it and lower down that one. So we can do the same sort of thing. We can make the fence more interesting by doing a little bit of a wiggle in there and follow that through. So you can still follow it through, but as long as you generally get it to go smaller at this end, bigger at this one, and this end above that end. So we'll put a little bit of a fence in. Let me just turn that picture around so I can see where I'm going. So a little bit of a fence low down this end, and then we want it to get bigger up this end, so we'll just vaguely draw a pencil line in lower down here, and then add in a little wiggle or two just to make it look a little bit like it's following the undulations of the ground and something like that. We'll put some fence posts in, and then they'll be closer together down the end. I won't put them all in, but just to give you an idea. Out of this side we'll probably want another tree. The scene that I took this from had lots and lots of trees, all varying sizes down here, and originally I did this painting and it just got too busy with all the trees in there. So I'm just going to simplify it and just put a slightly smaller tree, similar sort of shape to this one. So it's got a branch or two coming off, and then it'll twist off here, get some more branches coming off. So the branch lower down. So don't make it too high and too dominant, otherwise it will take over from your main tree up here. So we'll just bring some of those up and off and around. Probably enough for that one. We'll probably have a little bit of the bottom of the bank coming here, and we'll probably have a bit of a pathway getting smaller towards the end, but we'll fill those in as we go. People are interesting to draw. I have done a little example of how to draw people previously, but let's just draw and show you how to draw some people. People, I always think of the standard thing is a carrot shape, but I also say like a little kite shape or diamond shape. So you just make it long and thin like that, with a small head to it. You can always make the head a bit bigger, but if you do a great big head, it just looks wrong. And just put an arm down and you've got a person. So let's just take that spaceman's helmet off there and just have it as a little person. So you can just do people, just a few little people, make them sort of diamond shaped at the top and then just, or carrot shaped, long leg down. Don't try and do 2 legs, otherwise it suddenly turns into a Pac-Man. It turns out with a, like they've just got off a horse, little person, and you can have them holding hands or something like that, little people. If you're doing a whole row of people, keep the heads the same height and just make the bodies shorter and it will look like a person further away. Sorry, too big a head on that. So if you've got people, keep the heads the same level, and then just out of interest this is really, and you should look like people going away into the distance. So if you want to do children, similar sort of thing, same sort of carrot shape, but the head is in proportion bigger than the adult. And then you've got a little person as well. When I was doing this as my classroom workshop, people saying, can we have a dog? Can we have this? Can we have that? So a little dog, we'll just start with a dog's bottom, little rounded horseshoe shape, put a couple of legs on them. So this is a dog going away from you, a bit of a tail, and then you'll have a little bit of a nose sticking out and a couple of ears, and you've got a little dog appearing. So there's the people walking away. So we'll just now try and put a couple of little shapes in here. Try and keep the head somewhere about the top of the fence here. So you want the shoulders up around that area and the feet into the snow down the bottom. So just a little couple of shapes here. We could alter these later if we want to. So, and then a little tiny head on the top, and then when we come to paint them, we can put a hand in the pocket or something like that. We can alter them slightly. So that's all the drawing we need to do. You don't have to go into all the different twigs, all the different shapes into it. I'm just going to take off 1 or 2 of the surplus lines on here because some of them will be a bit strong. So just soften them out a bit so I can see where I'm going to go. So with this one, because it's a snowy scene, I'm going to use masking fluid just on the top of the fences and on the top of the some of the little branches, just to give it. You don't cover all the bottom part with masking fluid. We're just going to use a little bit on some of the areas. Now the way I use masking fluid is to use a block of household soap, and that way I can use any brush I want to. I don't have to have a special brush or anything to put it on there. Wet my brush, load the brush with household soap, so it really just protects your brush. This is purely to protect your brush. You don't paint soap onto your picture. You're just making sure that your brush is completely full of soap, and this means that when I've finished using it, it will wash out of my brush and won't glue your brush together. So it's just protecting your brush, which means you can use little brushes, fine brushes, and you can get a lot more detail with it. So with that now, I'm going to go into my rather gungy masking fluid and just starting to think about where I want some snow. So I might want a little bit of snow on some little bits of twigs and shrubs, perhaps a little bit up on some part of the side of the tree here. You might have a little bit on the bit going over the bottom of the tree where it's stuck to the grasses and things. Perhaps a few little grasses down the bottom here where I can put other bits of colour through eventually to give that a bit of interest. It will stop in the crook of the tree, so where the branches come out you'll have a little bit of snow coming onto the tops of the branches here, along the branches, so into the main branches. Now don't go mad and just paint it all the way along every branch. Just start to think you'll have a little bit of snow coming along the tops of some of these main branches, perhaps a little bit on some of the twiggy bits. It won't go vertically upwards, or not very often, but you want lots of little twiggy bits coming out from here, little bits of branches. You might have some bits of snow on. Don't forget you've got to paint underneath these a bit later, so keep them nice and fine at the moment, otherwise you'll end up having to paint back into all these little bits. So just painting along some of these twiggy bits, dot it so it's not a thick solid line. It will fall off in some places, so it won't be a solid line all the way through there. It will fall off, it will just break off as it goes down different bits onto different branches, just to bring those along. So just something like that really. So these can be little twigs coming out from the bottom here, and they'll show up a bit more when we've got the paint on there. We could do it just a little bit. I went a bit mad on mine with the snow on this tree, so just not all the long top branches on this distant tree, because again you wouldn't really see too much, just the lower branches you'll have a little bit on there. So I went a bit too high with mine, just a little bit here and there. The top of the fence, but again not a solid thick line, just put a little bit on and then a little bit more in some places across the tree here, and then tops of the posts and things you might have a little bit more on. There might be a middle rail to your fence, so let's just put a bit onto the middle of that as well, which we can paint in a bit later, just to give me a little bit of interest there. A few flicks down the bottom. Don't need to mask your people out, you just leave that as it is. And then what I'm going to do is flick on a bit of extra to give me some snow towards the end. So you can either put your finger out and tap your brush against it, or you can just flick your brush like that. Depends what works for you. Some people prefer to do it that way. You do have to make sure you don't go too mad, otherwise it goes everywhere. And then I do a bit of both really, just flick it down. And this is to give me like the snowflakes and a bit more interest into it a bit later on. If you've got any big blobs, just try and use your brush and take them off so they're not too big on there, because otherwise it tends to soak into your paper. So anything where there's a great big puddle of it, try and just smooth it out a little bit, so it can soak into your paper and tear your paper. So I'm just going to leave that to dry for a moment. So I'm just going to clean my brush now, clean my finger where I've been flicking it with the brush, put the lid back on my masking fluid. And while that's drying, I can start to mix up all the colours I'm going to use in the background. So with this picture, I wanted to make the background a lot more interesting than it was on the day that I was there. It wasn't snowing on the day, it was just a cold winter's day, and it was very, very wet and muddy. So I've invented this scene really, but the colours were quite dull and grey there. So I wanted to make it a bit more like the bright, crisp, frosty times that you get in the winter. So to do that, it's the colours you use in the background here. So I'm just going to clean that brush out so the masking doesn't stick into it, just in ordinary water. So we're going to mix up some colours. So we want a nice bright blue, perhaps a bit of cerulean blue for the sky. You can see the sky through the background because there's no leaves on the trees, so you'll see a bit more sky this time of year in the winter time than you would do in the summer. So a bit of cerulean blue, nice bright crisp looking colourful blue there. We want to make a bit of purple for the clouds and background trees, so that's ultramarine blue and a touch of Elysian crimson, and that gives you a nice purpley colour. Now you want everything to do with a snow scene, keep it onto the bluey side, not yellowy, not pinky, you want it onto the blue side. So with these colours now I'm mixing up, I'm just going to test them out first, make sure that they're the right sort of shade. So test it on a scrap piece of paper somewhere first to make sure it's the colour that you want. We're then going to put some dark bluey greens into this background behind these trees. So you can have a bit of ultramarine blue and a touch of cadmium yellow. Again, keep it bluey, you don't want it yellowy. Yellow is a sign of spring, summer, so keep these very, very bluey greens. You want them quite strong, but you want them to still be able to flow. I will just find, I use the back of this picture at the moment just to show you the colours that I'm mixing up. So that's my summer sky blue, cerulean blue, perhaps a little bit stronger than that now I've mixed it up, I want it a little bit stronger. And then my bluey purpley colour, so this is my bluey purpley colour, so it's blue, not red, so it's ultramarine blue and a touch of Elysian crimson. This is my bluey green colour with ultramarine blue and a touch of cadmium yellow, so it's very bluey. And then I want a Prussian blue. Actually, I think I've mixed that up in the wrong puddle. Let's get that one going in a different place there. A bit more bluey into that one, just give it a bit more of a different shade. There's a bluey green colour that's slightly different to that one. Then again a Prussian blue or phthalo blue and a touch of burnt sienna. Only a touch will give you a strong dark bottle green colour. And again, that's another one. There we go, strong dark bottle green colour. You can put a bit of burnt sienna in on its own because that just changes the colour of the background a bit, gives it a bit more interest. Just try and get that cleaned up so I can use that on its own there, quite strong with those. And now we can start to paint the background. By that time this should be dry. It often feels a little bit tacky, but it should be dry. We're also going to put a pinch of salt into the background to give it the look of frost on the trees there. So just while we're waiting for that to dry, I'll just get the salt ready. So we'll pause for a moment there. Okay, I've got all my colours mixed up ready and I just had to go and find the salt, so now I've got that back, we can make a start. So we're going to just wet this background area. We're going to use a big brush, a mop brush, and we're just going to pop in this water, stopping at the snowy banks. Go over your trees, forget your trees are there at the moment. We're just going to get the effect of how this is going to work by wetting this background all the way down, stopping at this snow. Go over the people that you've drawn in here, down here as well, up through the fence a little way to stop at the snow that's going on behind there. So you've got to make sure this stays glossy wet. So I'm just making sure this stays glossy wet before I start. So I just, because I'm using Bockingford 300, normally when I do my proper paintings I use 425 Bockingford paper, but for this particular one I've just picked up a piece of 300 grams, so I've got to make sure it stays wetter a little bit more carefully than if you use a heavier weight paper. It stays wetter longer, it's easier to paint on, but I've just picked up a piece of slightly thinner paper and I've just got to be a bit more careful about how quickly I work on it and how wet it will stay. So that's staying glossy wet all over. Have your ball slightly tilted, hopefully you can see it's slightly shiny there just on the top half, and now we're going to go for it. So in with the cerulean blue for the sky, and it's just going to be where the sky is showing through these gaps in the background here. So it's the gaps in between the clouds, in between the trees here. So we're just putting a bit of blue on. Don't be frightened, just leave some areas without paint on. So you can leave it quite light in some places. Go over your trees, forget they're there, and just put a little bit of that blue in casually around here, just bringing it down to the background. Clean your brush, dry it on a bit of tissue, straight into your purpley colours, and then we're going to put in perhaps a little cloud or two. Might have another little cloud or something like this, and then it can be the clouds coming in from the background, or it can be the tops of trees, bringing it round here so it looks like it's disappearing into the background here a little way. Again, just bringing it through the tree, around the tops here. So you do have to paint this fairly quickly for the background. You do have to go into this and just whack it on. If you take too long to think about it, it will dry out. So you need to keep this moving, keep it going through, and just really go for it for this part. So now we're going to swap into these greens. This is a suggestion of the trees behind there. So perhaps we have a bit of bluey green around here. This could be a holly bush or a holly tree. So this is the ultramarine blue and a touch of cadmium yellow. Don't have it too yellowy, because otherwise it will look like a spring scene, not a winter one. So this is how we'll do this. We'll just bring some of those colours down here, down to, oh, I've just gone over my snowy bank. So if you happen to go over an area where you don't want it to be, just wet it, dry it with a bit of tissue and lift it back out again. So that was a good demonstration of mine of how to rescue it if you've gone wrong. So now we're going in with these even stronger bluey greens with the Prussian blue and burnt sienna, just bringing it through down over the fence a little way down to the horizon line where the little bank's going into the background there. And again, the same on this side now. Oh, should have started with a slightly paler green first, but it doesn't really matter. They'll both mingle and mix a little bit more, so different shades of the bluey greens in there, and then your very strong. I will avoid the tree a little bit so you don't get too much of a hard line in there. Up to the base of the tree, a bit more blues. You can make this slightly different colours. You can have more Prussian blue, you can have more phthalo blue, you can have little different shades, but what I'm trying to do is just make it look vaguely like shrubs in the background, keeping that nice and crisp and sharp onto the horizon there to give me the bits into the. And once it starts to dry out, you have to stop, but as it's still damp, I can add in perhaps a little bit of burnt sienna. That will mix with the other colours, and again just changes that background, just gives it a bit of interest by giving it a slightly different colour in there. But that's not essential to put that colour in, it's just adding a bit of something else to bring the colours through and add a bit more interest into your background there. So just adding those bits in, but you can keep feeding it with a little bit of dark towards the bottom here, just adding in little bits of extra colour until it starts to dry. Then just pause for a minute before it dries completely. I'm just going to clean my brush, put it down, take off any puddles. If there's any puddles sitting on any edges, on any masking fluid, just keep drying your brush, taking the puddle out, drying the brush, taking any puddles out. Before it dries, I'm just going to take some salt. This is just a little salt cellar here, and then take a pinch of salt. I'm just going to sprinkle 20 grains over those distant trees, and hopefully each little grain will absorb a little bit of paint and it should look like frost on the trees. Again, not essential, but a bit of fun really to make the background just a little bit more interesting. There might have been 25 grains on that, I can't remember. So we need to let that salt dry, but while that's drying, we can do a little bit of work on the foreground here. So while that's drying out, we can start to work on the foreground a little bit. And we just want to add a little bit of colour into that foreground. It will pick up the colours from the sky, so it'll have a bit of the blues, a bit of the purple colours. I'm also going to put a little bit of weaker ultramarine blue, just ultramarine blue on its own there, to give me a bit of shadows into it. So again, this time I'm going to dampen this area, not quite so thoroughly. I'm just going to bring it down the slope, just a bit of water. Don't go anywhere near the top bit with your water. Just flick it across the bottom here. This is just to keep it soft as I put these colours in. And you're going to have a little bit of the purpley colour just coming down, perhaps from your tree down to the bottom of the bank, or from the bottom of the bank upwards, to give you the few little shadows that you can see, which will end up being there across the path a couple of times. We will put a bit more shadow in a bit later on, but this just starts to give you some shaping into it. And then perhaps across the other side, a little bit behind these fence posts where they're going to be. A bit of ultramarine blue as well, that'll just help to make it just a bit more interesting colour really, and just give it a bit more life. And leave it at that. If you're inclined to just go in and fiddle, don't. Sit on your hands and watch the salt dry. Okay, I've got all my colours mixed up ready, and I just had to go and find the salt, so now I've got that back, we can make a start. So we're going to just wet this background area. We're going to use a big brush, a mop brush, and we're just going to pop in this water, stopping at the snowy banks. Go over your trees, forget your trees are there at the moment. We're just going to get the effect of how this is going to work by wetting this background all the way down, stopping at this snow. Go over the people that you've drawn in here, down here as well, up through the fence a little way to stop at the snow that's going on behind there. So you've got to make sure this stays glossy wet. So I'm just making sure this stays glossy wet before I start. So because I'm using Bockingford 300, normally when I do my proper paintings I use 425 Bockingford paper, but for this particular one I've just picked up a piece of 300 grams, so I've got to make sure it stays wetter a little bit more carefully than if you use a heavier weight paper. It stays wetter longer, it's easier to paint on, but I've just picked up a piece of slightly thinner paper, and I've just got to be a bit more careful about how quickly I work on it and how wet it will stay. So that's staying glossy wet all over. Have your board slightly tilted. Hopefully you can see it's slightly shiny there just on the top half. And now we're going to go for it. So in with the cerulean blue for the sky, and it's just going to be where the sky is showing through these gaps in the background here. So it's the gaps in between the clouds, in between the trees here. So we're just putting a bit of blue on. Don't be frightened, just leave some areas without paint on. So you can leave it quite light in some places. Go over your trees, forget they're there, and just put a little bit of that blue in casually around here, just bringing it down to the background. Clean your brush, dry it on a bit of tissue, straight into your purpley colours, and then we're going to put in perhaps a little cloud or two. Might have another little cloud or something like this, and then it can be the clouds coming in from the background, or it can be the tops of trees, bringing it round here so it looks like it's disappearing into the background here a little way. Again, just bringing it through the tree, around the tops here. So you do have to paint this fairly quickly for the background. You do have to go into this and just whack it on. If you take too long to think about it, it will dry out. So you need to keep this moving, keep it going through, and just really go for it for this part. So now we're going to swap into these greens. This is a suggestion of the trees behind there. So perhaps we have a bit of bluey green around here. This could be a holly bush or holly tree. So this is the ultramarine blue and a touch of cadmium yellow. Don't have it too yellowy, because otherwise it will look like a spring scene, not a winter one. So this is how we'll do this. We'll just bring some of those colours down here, down to, oh, I've just gone over my snowy bank. So if you happen to go over an area where you don't want it to be, just wet it, dry it with a bit of tissue and lift it back out again. So that was a good demonstration of mine of how to rescue it if you've gone wrong. So now we're going in with these even stronger bluey greens with the Prussian blue and burnt sienna, just bringing it through down over the fence a little way down to the horizon line where the little bank's going into the background there. And again, the same on this side now. Oops, should have started with a slightly paler green first, but it doesn't really matter. They'll both mingle and mix a little bit more. So different shades of the bluey greens in there, and then your very strong. I will avoid the tree a little bit so you don't get too much of a hard line in there. Up to the base of the tree, a bit more blues. You can make this slightly different colours. You can have more Prussian blue, you can have more phthalo blue, you can have little different shades. But what I'm trying to do is just make it look vaguely like shrubs in the background, keeping that nice and crisp and sharp onto the horizon there to give me the bits into the. And once it starts to dry out, you have to stop, but as it's still damp, I can add in perhaps a little bit of burnt sienna. That will mix with the other colours, and again just changes that background, just gives it a bit of interest by giving it a slightly different colour in there. But that's not essential to put that colour in, it's just adding a bit of something else to bring the colours through and add a bit more interest into your background there. So just adding those bits in, but you can keep feeding it with a little bit of dark towards the bottom here, just adding in little bits of extra colour until it starts to dry. Then just pause for a minute before it dries completely. I'm just going to clean my brush, put it down, take off any puddles. If there's any puddles sitting on any edges, on any masking fluid, just keep drying your brush, taking the puddle out, drying the brush, taking any puddles out. Before it dries, I'm just going to take some salt. This is just a little salt cellar here, and then take a pinch of salt. I'm just going to sprinkle 20 grains over those distant trees, and hopefully each little grain will absorb a little bit of paint and it should look like frost on the trees. Again, not essential, but a bit of fun really to make the background just a little bit more interesting. There might have been 25 grains on that, I can't remember. So we need to let that salt dry, but while that's drying, we can do a little bit of work on the foreground here. So while that's drying out, we can start to work on the foreground a little bit. And we just want to add a little bit of colour into that foreground. It will pick up the colours from the sky. So it'll have a bit of the blues, a bit of the purple colours. I'm also going to put a little bit of weaker ultramarine blue, just ultramarine blue on its own there, to give me a bit of shadows into it. So So again, this time I'm going to dampen this area, not quite so thoroughly. I'm just going to bring it down the slope, just a bit of water. Don't go anywhere near the top bit with your water. Just flick it across the bottom here. This is just to keep it soft as I put these colours in. And you're going to have a little bit of the purpley colour just coming down, perhaps from your tree down to the bottom of the bank, or from the bottom of the bank upwards, to give you the few little shadows that you can see, which will end up being there across the path a couple of times. We will put a bit more shadow in a bit later on, but this just starts to give you some shaping into it, and then perhaps across the other side, a little bit behind these fence posts where they're going to be. A bit of ultramarine blue as well, that'll just help to make it just a bit more interesting colour really, and just give it a bit more life, and leave it at that. If you're inclined to just go in and fiddle, don't. Sit on your hands and watch the salt dry. Okay, that should be nice and dry now. The salt has worked a little bit on here. It all depends on the colours you've used, how thick they are, how what colours you've used, as how the salt works, and timing, how wet it is when you put it on there. So some will work completely different to others. So it's just a bit of fun. It should start to look like frost or snowflakes or something coming down on your picture. It also depends on what salt you've used as well, as what sort of effects you get with it. So it's a bit of trial and error. So now we've got this, it's all nice and dry. Brush the surplus salt off, but don't brush too heavily, so you want to leave your masking on at the moment. We're just going to put the background or the distant trees into this. So you just want to start with a little brush, and we're just going to use the same purpley colour that we've had before. And you can either use a rigger brush, which is a long thin brush like this, or a small round. You won't get a smaller round than that, but something like that is a very useful brush. This is a rigger or a liner they call, and whenever you're doing trees, start at the bottom, put your brush on and lift it off as you work up the tree. So put your brush on, lift it off, put your brush back onto the trunk or onto a branch, lift it off, lift it off, lift it off, and then you'll get these lovely effective little trees. The thing with a rigger or a line writer, it gets you to go nice and thin, so you get these lovely long lines coming up through the picture here. So stick with your purpley colours for the background, making sure that the trees actually start in the snow and not hovering in mid-air, and just bring lots of these up for your background trees. Don't take them up too much beyond your branches coming over, so we can just break it down so it makes it look like they're further away. And again, lots of little twigs onto these, so just bring up a few more of these distant ones, just working through these. You'll find you can go quite quickly after a while once you get the hang of how these brushes work. It's quite nice to use a little rigger for these sort of things. I'm going to get these slightly taller as I come up this end. Again, it's your perspective, getting them a little bit bigger as they come closer to you. So a little bit taller, just giving the brush a little bit of a wiggle. More twigs, more branches. If in doubt, add some more twigs and branches on. So the more twigs you put on, the better. I'm just rushing through it a little bit, so we'll just get these on here. So again, we'll have a few little distant ones over here, still with a purpley colour at the moment. Putting that on and just lifting that off. This could be a little shrub, or just give it a bit of a wiggle, move it away, and then you can have a group of trees coming up. Bring them up the paper and lift your brush off as you come to the end. If you find it difficult working this way around to push the brush away, turn your picture upside down and drag it towards you. I don't like that big blob there, so I'm just going to dab it slightly and just make it fade into the background. Always keep your tissue nice and clean and dry, not like my old bit of kitchen roll here, which I've been using all day today. But let's just do a few more little bits up here. Oops, going to be a bit blob, that one. Just then, if you have a difficulty doing that, then turn the picture around and drag it towards you, so it might find that a bit easier. I wanted to put a few more in of a slightly different colour now, so I'm going to mix up a little bit of ultramarine blue and burnt umber, just to give me something, a darker shade. Keep everything on the blue side rather than the brown side. We don't want these trees to go too brown into the background, especially these background ones, because you want them as a sort of silhouette. The main tree is going to be about here, so let's put perhaps another one in slightly different shade, so it's not all the purpley colour. Bring that up, slightly bigger brush now because this is a slightly bigger one. Bringing it up, twisting it away. Perhaps I put another branch down here, and then as I get into the smaller branches, swap to my little rigger brush or thinner brush and put in some little branches coming down here, so you get the mixture of the lines on there. You could do as many or as few as these as you want to, so if you want to do a few more you can do. I'll probably stop somewhere soon because it is a little tedious for you to watch me doing all these. So I'll just put another slightly darker one in here because this is a bit stronger and darker with the colour. It's ultramarine blue and burnt umber. I'm just going to bring it into the snow just a fraction and then bring a branch off, and then perhaps split this as it comes up here. It gets thinner and thinner as you go up a tree, and then swap to my rigger brush and put lots of little twisty branches coming out of it. So I've got the main trunks coming up, and then do this with the slightly darker one. Not so dark that it's going to be as bold as this tree. This is background, so you just want to put lots of little thin ones in to get the effect of your distance in there. Okay, that's probably enough of those now. So now we can start to look at the main tree on here, and what we're going to do is mix some brighter, stronger colours up for this tree. So in the winter, when you've got the snow down, you'll start to get a lot of contrast into your trees. You'll see lovely colours coming into that bark. So we'll use a little bit of burnt umber, just a bit of burnt umber on its own. You'll also want some greys as well, ultramarine blue, burnt umber mix, keeping it a lot more bluey. You can put in all sorts of different colours. You can use a bit of yellowy green colour, ultramarine blue and cadmium yellow, to give you the effect of moss on the branches or on the trunks there. You can put in a bit of yellow ochre if you wanted to. It's up to you completely what colours you use, but what you will need to do is have a very strong ultramarine blue burnt umber mix to put in the dark side at the side of the tree. Keep this onto the bluey side, not the browny side. So this time now, excuse me, we're just going to dampen the main trunk on this one. I'll do this one first. You could have done with that one being done as well, but we'll do this one first so I don't lean on that side of it. So bringing that down, I'm just dampening that with a bit of clean water or slightly grubby water as I've just been using. Bringing it down into this bit of the snow down here. Don't make too much of the root system down here because it's covered in snow. You won't see it. So just bring that dampened bit down into that snow. Bring it up the paper. Think about where your branches are going to go. Perhaps have another little branch there somewhere. This is just dampening the main branches of this, not all the little ones. Just bring it up the main parts here. Keeping where you've got the masking fluid, keeping that on top of the branches. I know it sounds silly, but you suddenly lose track. So I'm just putting a bit of water on with that. I'm going to use my weaker browny grey first of all and just pop that in so I can see where I'm going. That's starting to, this will be the lighter side of the tree. And then into that, so again it's just adding a little bit of colour to it. I'm going to put all those lovely other rich colours that I'd got on the go. So a bit of burnt umber, just pop that in so it's, you get light and dark into this tree. Bring it round to the dark side as well, and then just bringing that down into the bottom. So a bit of burnt umber, but I'm not putting that everywhere. Just putting a few bits in, leaving some of that original grey colour to show through in some places. So a little bit more of that burnt umber in, a bit more burnt umber, bit more burnt umber. And then I'm going to put in some other colours as well. So we're going to put in some of that greeny colour for the moss, just letting that run down. Again, just onto the light side of the tree. We'll come onto the other side in a moment. So just keeping that onto the light side. So you've got some of the yellowy green colours showing through where the moss has collected onto the bits there. You might even want to put in a bit of, let's say, cadmium, or sorry, just a bit of yellow ochre, because that again just gives you a bit of colour into that main trunk, or trunks I should say. And now we're going to get that really strong dark ultramarine blue and burnt umber while this is still wet. The underside of these branches, under the snowy bits that you've put on there, under the curl of a branch if it's coming out the middle of a tree there, under the branch, down the dark side of the tree. Oh, that sounds a bit scary, doesn't it? The dark side of the tree. So you're putting all these little bits of the ultramarine blue burnt umber mix, nice and strong and bold, into the dark bits here. Let that seat into the snow down the bottom. And again, now underside of these branches, under the snowy bits. This is to try and make it look rounded and three-dimensional. Again, just bring this round. Tops of the branches, let it go back to the colour you had originally. And then under that one. So from now on, you can just keep using this dark colour. You can vary it a little bit on some of the bigger branches. But we're going to, again, swap to a slightly smaller brush. We can use a rigger in a minute, but we're just going to swap to a slightly smaller brush. We have that one. One or two people have asked me what sort of brushes I use. I only use cheap nylon-y type brushes. I don't use sables or anything like that. I find them a little uncontrollable, especially for beginners when they're starting. So these are just cheap nylon-y type brushes, soft nylon, not too stiff. So now with a slightly smaller brush, I can start to do all these little twiggy bits. Again, always start on a branch, thicker branch, and just drag it out away from you, making sure that where you've got the masking, you're putting a bit of twig underneath it in some of the places, and then take the twigs on a bit further. So they're coming off the tree here. If the branch is still quite big, you might want to vary that colour, put a bit more brown into it in some places, but if it's very thin, then just stick to that dark colour coming through and off the picture. Let's do that one again, that dark underneath here, taking it through underneath the picture, underneath the branch here, building up your little picture underneath the branch, leaving the snow on top, taking it away. And you can just keep going with those. The more twigs you put in, the better. Twigs have a habit of coming out from unusual places on branches. They'll come out the sides, they'll come off. So don't have them just on the ends of the long branches you're going across here. So you can have plenty more on the ends, but also have a few coming off at different angles. So they're making it look a little bit more realistic. They'll perhaps, bend round and cross the branch it's already on. They'll go backwards and forwards. So just take your little brush for a dance across the paper, really, to make this look realistic. A few on this side. Again, keeping this nice and strong with your paint mix that you're using. I can do it one side. It's harder to do it on the other side there. I should turn my picture upside down and do it the other way, really, but let's just put a few slightly different coloured ones in there as well to give you a little bit of interest. And again, just bring that out onto this side, make that branch a bit fatter as I go around here. A few little twiggy bits down the bottom here as well, because we've got a bit of masking down here. We might as well put a few little twigs in that to give it a bit more base to the tree. A couple of dashes while that's on the brush down into these snowy bits. A few into that one as well. Let's do a bit more on this tree on this side. Have a few going off there. Same sort of thing. I'm just going to use a smaller brush though to start with. Wet the trunk. If it's very dark behind it, wet it and rub it a little bit. It will just lift a little bit of the paint that's already on there. Make sure it comes into the snowy bank but not in front of your fence. So just the main trunks, we're going to pop in a little bit of the different colour, a little bit of burnt umber. First of all, a bit of the yellowy greens for moss and things like that onto those bits. And then again into that strong dark ultramarine blue burnt umber onto the darker side, the more shadowy side of the tree. Make it look a bit more shapely, and then you can take these off into the little branches, up into some branches at the top here somewhere, and then take this away. Now I'll swap to my smaller brush And again, let this dance across the paper, doing little twigs, breaking it down into little branches and twigs. The more you put on, the more effective it looks. Just bringing a few more across here. And across into this one. That'll probably do for branches and trees. We'll put the fence on. So with that one, I just want a yucky, moss-coloured pine I'm looking for. So that's a bit of yellow ochre and a touch of ultramarine blue to give me a grotty green colour really. And I'm just going to put underneath that snow I've got on here, just a line across the bottom, the rail on the fence. Just do the same on the other side of it. So I've got the snow on the top and the rails just underneath it. They will get slightly bigger or slightly wider as they come up to the right hand side. The fence posts I can bring down into make sure they come into the snow and in front of any trees you've got in the background there. So they actually come forward. You can't have the tree trunks in front of the fence, it won't look right. So they get smaller and smaller and smaller and disappear into the background there. Put another fence post down there somewhere. Nearly done. We'll do a little bit more work onto these areas around here where we've got the little bits of grasses and things. We'll use some of those background greens into those little bits of the grasses and the bits around the base here to liven that bit up. A little bit of burnt sienna perhaps, just to give you a bit of colour into this foreground, because it's surprising when you've got the snow down how bright some of these little areas seem. So where I've put that little bit of masking fluid, I'm just putting a bit of colour into it, so when we rub the masking off we got some colour behind it really. Perhaps a bit of brighter green in there as well, just to give that a bit more interest. Not too much, but just something to make it look a little bit more lively. Now we just want to put the people on and then a little bit of the pathway. So the people, we're just going to have a red jumper. I don't know why I always have one red and one blue when I'm doing a person. So we just put a little bit of red onto this person here. Someone's got his hand in the pocket. And then a bit of bright blue, perhaps we use the same cerulean blue as we've had before in the sky, over the top of this person. Have them holding hands, how romantic. Another arm down there. Just pause for a minute so the colours don't run in, as that one's just doing there. So a little bit of dark for the head. Again, don't make it too big. You can always make it bigger, but you can't make it smaller, or it's difficult to make it smaller. My colours are running in. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that off. And then down the trousers, something dark, make sure they're about the same sort of level. If you can get just a little bit of dark shading to the one side of them, that just helps to make them look a little bit more shapely. We need to put a little bit of a path in, so that is just a burnt sienna colour. Now it can go horribly wrong here, so all I'm going to do is just do a few little dashes of the burnt sienna colour. This is supposed to just look like the where the snow's melted and you've got a little bit of pathway showing through, so don't go too mad with it and put a big blob there. So just make it go a little bit wider as it comes forward. It's just adding a bit of colour and interest to your picture. I want to put a bit of a shadow down here, but I can't really do that until it's completely dry. So I'm just going to pause for a minute and just dry it with a hairdryer at this stage and just make sure it's completely dry before we finish off the last few bits. Okay, I've just dried it, and at the same time I was just rubbing the masking fluid off around this top area. So just firmly rub it and you'll find it just peels off. Don't try and scratch it or scrape it, just rub your finger over it and it should just peel off. And then you've just got to do a couple of little bits just to seat it all down and make it all look right. That's all the masking off now, it's all nice and dry. So just before we finish off, just a last little bit, we want to just put a shadow coming down here and some icy bits on the ground. So fairly medium-sized brush, something like this is a 12 round. A little bit of weak ultramarine blue, and it has to be weak. You don't want it too strong for this, it could wreck your picture at this point, so you don't want to do that now. And we want a shadow coming from this tree, and just do it in a nice firm brush stroke down the slope. As soon as it gets to the bottom of the slope, it will go horizontally across the path, and it will go disappear off to the other end there. You've probably got some shadows on there already, but it brings the tree forward and sends the people back. You can also put a little bit more of that for like little bits of ice and snow on the pathway. Again, it's just adding a little bit of colour into your foreground, so you can just put a bit of the blues into that, just a dash or two to make them look a bit more icy. What you also need to do is some of these white bits are too stark, so especially if they're in the shadow, you may need to just paint in. That one's too big a blob of masking there. I just want to put a little bit, break it with a bit of the dark there, and just some of these branches, it's just a little bit too stark with the white on there. So if it's a big area, just run it, oh, grubby water. Use my bit of clean cloth again, take that out. Little bit of clean water onto the bigger areas. If you've got big blobs of white on there, just put a bit of water on, and then a little bit of your ultramarine blue, just nice and not too strong, onto the bottoms of that. Let it run up into that water a little way. Leave it white at the top, but you'll just make it look softer and like the shadows on the snow. And some of these bigger bits, just break them with a little bit of weak ultramarine blue so they're not too stark. Otherwise they do look a little contrived. So just a few little bits into these white bits here. If it's a small bit, don't bother wetting it because it's too small. And again, down your fence, you need that lighter bit on top, but just break it so it's not too bright and white. And there we go, one little snowy scene. And let me just put a mat around that just to show you what it looks like. There's one little snowy scene. That's all there is to it.